Parking standards, also known as parking ratios, parking norms, or parking requirements, exist in most European countries and cities. The original idea was to encourage people to park their cars off-street, to keep the streets free for flowing traffic, and to prevent a new location, for example a workplace building, from generating parking problems in its vicinity. Therefore, laws and regulations have been introduced that require a certain number of parking places per building. This could be per apartment, or per square metre of a business area, or per seat in a restaurant. At the beginning, the philosophy behind parking standards mandated a minimum number of off-street places that had to be built. Over time, greater consideration was given to sustainable transport policies and the potential to influence mobility behaviour, as well as the reduction of building costs for parking spaces to make living more affordable. In many cases, maximum standards were introduced to replace the former minimum standards. As these are maximum standards, the developers can choose to provide fewer spaces. So, for example, instead of 1 parking space per apartment, only 0.8 parking spaces are to be built. Since parking standards are fixed in the building code, a change needs several well-argued requirements. Excellent public transport, shared mobility options such as car sharing, incentives for the use of bicycles including bike parking facilities, or cargo bike sharing, to name only a few. An absolute necessity for a lower minimum standard is paid or at least regulated on-street parking in the area. When these requirements are fulfilled, a city can conclude a contract with a developer to lower minimum standards. In Graz, Austria, the first mobility contracts were signed in 2011. Since then, 33 such contracts have been made. What has been the experience in Graz with this regulation? We'll ask Wolfgang Feigl from the Department of Transport Planning in Graz.
Thinking of how difficult it was to convince the first mobility contract partners to conclude such a contract, we see how times have changed over the years. Nowadays, more and more developers ask self-motivated at the very early stage of their plans how to achieve a mobility contract. Because if they can reduce their number of parking spaces, they are able to build flats that meet the needs of their future customers. And they save money at the end of the day. In our experience, the mobility contract can be a crucial part to change the mobility behavior of people.
A good example in Graz is the campus estate in Eggenberg. Here, 386 apartments and 1 student residence have been built. The developer signed a mobility contract due to excellent availability of public transport. Furthermore, they provided shared mobility options such as car sharing, implemented high-quality bike parking facilities, as well as delivery boxes for packages, provided annual public transport tickets, and screens with dynamic public transport information in the staircases. And of course, the number of parking spaces required by law could be reduced. How do developers feel about reduced parking standards?
Der Campus Eggenberg ist ein bestes Beispiel für die Anwendung des Mobilitätsvertrages in Graz. Der Mobilitätsvertrag bietet dem Bauträger ein interessantes Instrument, um Stellplätze bei Projekten reduzieren zu können. Im konkreten Fall hier im Campus Eggenberg konnten wir einen Stellplatzschlüssel von 0,75 Parkplätzen je Wohneinheit erreichen, im Gegensatz zu üblichen einen Stellplatz je Wohneinheit. Für uns Bauträger ist der Mobilitätsvertrag eine Chance, weniger Stellplätze errichten zu müssen und gleichzeitig den Mobilitätskomfort für den Nutzer erhalten zu können. Es ist auch ein Argument in der Verwertung der Wohneinheiten, nicht verpflichtend Stellplätze seitens des Nutzers erwerben zu müssen.
When we are faced with congested road infrastructure, a need for a more equitable use of public space, a trend towards multimodality, and a lack of affordable housing, then a strategy focusing on the cost-efficient measure of mobility contracts for developers could certainly lead to an increase of quality of life in our cities.